Hello students, we meet again to continue with our Unit 5, that is Logistics in International Trade, the part of Fundamentals of Logistics course. In today's session, we will be dealing with the aspects related to international trade, which are documentations and procedures required in international trade. So, unlike a domestic sale where a buyer meets the supplier or the supplier meets the buyer, maybe face to face, and they discuss about the terms of pricing and payment and delivery. They look at the quality of the goods and finally agree upon the order. In international marketing or overseas sales, the procedures are a bit more. It is not as simple as that. Whenever, for example, pricing is decided, it is not just based on the cost of production. There are several other issues related to international trade, which, if not spelled very clearly by the buyer, the supplier may quote the price, and by the time he delivers the goods to the customer, he will realize that he has made a big loss in spite of covering the entire cost of production. So, it is imperative for the supplier to understand the terms and conditions which the buyer in the overseas market places before the supplier, and the supplier has to incorporate all the costs related to these requirements of the buyer, and this will help for a smooth sale and also maybe in future engagements with the buyer and the supplier. So today let us understand those very important documents which are standard across the world required in international trade. There are several documents that is required during an export or import of the goods. Some of them are standard documents and some more documents are spelt out by the government of the importing country. There may be certain regulations, guidelines which the business person in that country who is also the importer should be adhering to. And the supplier has to conduct all those procedures in his country so that whenever the goods are shipped from one destination to the other by any mode of shipment, then the government body there, which we normally call as customs, whether it is in air or sea, they inspect whether all those conditions are satisfied and only then release the goods to the customer or the buyer. Some are very standard documents, as I said. So we'll be discussing more about standard documents, whereas additional documents are many, can be several, depending on the guidelines and the rules of the nation. Some common trade related documents are pro forma invoice, commercial invoice, a packing list, a bill of lading or an airway bill depending on the mode of the shipment, a certificate of origin, a consular invoice. Well, this is not a standard document in the sense some country do not actually require this, and some country guidelines mandate that a consular invoice is a must. Then a combined transport document. Well, this is depending on the mode of the shipment. If you're using only sea, then you don't have to, the company need not have to release this document. For imports in specific, along with all the above, there is a doc challan and a bill of entry. Now, as we go through all these documents, please understand that I'll be using only the word document, document and document. A document and whatever is written in that document has got a lot of bearing on the activities of the supplier. He has to adhere to it. He has to see to it that he has fulfilled everything that is written in the documents. Documents are just a proof of what has been happening in the sale. So, it is not just writing in the document, but those related activities that is going to increase his cost. And the supplier needs to be very careful before confirming the order with the buyer. He has to know all the terms and conditions. So let us go one by one to understand what is a pro forma invoice, followed by the other documents. A pro forma invoice in many countries or in many different regions of the world, they call it the sales order. It is what, even before the production commences, the buyer and the supplier meet together, maybe on a telephone or an email or a fax machine, and or face-to-face meeting where the supplier flies to the country where the buyer is, or the buyer comes to the country where the supplier is. They sit across the table and they discuss. Once it is discussed and confirmed, a document is prepared, and that document has to be signed by both the parties, and this is known as pro forma invoice. A pro forma invoice consists of a lot of details. Definitely it will consist of a pro forma invoice number, followed by the seller details, his address, company name, followed the buyer's company name, address, where it is located, along with the contact details like telephone, fax or email, etc. has to be put in the pro forma invoice. Along with it, there are details of when is the likelihood of the shipment of the goods. That means when the goods will be produced, or if the goods are available in the inventory, when it can be packed and get ready for loading of the goods. And the goods get shipped to the destination. How long would it take? Even that may be written. This is followed by the details of the product. It is always better that every technical details are spelled out properly in the pro forma invoice so that there is no ambiguity. But sometimes the technical details are so large, that so big that everything cannot be written. So we always have something known as a customer indent for that, and that indent copy needs to be attached with the pro forma invoice so that the indent number matches with the pro forma invoice number, and there is a understanding between the buyer and the supplier that what is being confirmed is what is being delivered. Along with it, the agreed upon price, and along with the price, very important, is the terms of sale. We will study about what is terms of sales, which is very elaborate. Next is, what are the terms of payment? How will the buyer make the payment for the goods shipped by the supplier? Well, the quantity details are also mentioned. With this, most of the details have been covered. In addition, if there are any inspection required, in addition as per the government regulation, or there must be any further mention on the package box as required by the customs of those countries, even those things are spelled out very clearly, because sometimes this may lead to inflation of the cost. For example, some companies say that if you're sending me some goods, these goods are very fragile and it needs to be protected, and during a transportation it may get into break or spoil. So you need to give me a special packing. Well, can be a thermocol packing, or you may put thermocol balls inside. Well, this is an addition cost to the normal packaging which the company would be doing. So that is again mentioned in the pro forma invoice. So all these things has to be clearly spelled out in the pro forma invoice and signed by both the parties so that there is no ambiguity to it. So as it is in front of you, some points have been mentioned here. It is a document prepared by the seller and sent to the buyer and based on terms and conditions of the transaction. Well, pro forma invoice is different than the commercial invoice, which is what we are going to talk about next. And how it differs, I will discuss shortly. The pro forma invoice becomes the final commercial invoice. Well, that's what it leads to. But there are certain distinct issues related to commercial invoice, because commercial invoice is an invoice prepared when the goods are ready to be shipped. It is used when goods are cleared through customs in the importing country. Pro forma invoice is definitely attached. Along with this, the customer indent, if it is required by the customs of that country, it has to be attached. Now the next part we come is what is understanding commercial invoice. As I just informed to you, a commercial invoice is an invoice prepared by the supplier when the goods are ready to be shipped. It is playing a very important role, a dual role. Commercial invoices are always to be submitted to the authorities, important authorities in origin. A commercial invoice has to go to the customs of the supplier or the shipper's country. It is a commercial invoice which is inspected by the customs of his country. What is declared on the commercial invoice is very important. These documents in original is also submitted to the bank, because in international transactions, banks play a very crucial role. However, since we are related to the logistics part of the international trade, banking issues are not bought into the content. However, just briefly, I would like to inform you that most of the documents are routed through the bank in international trade. Bank of the supplier country, bank of the buyer country have to link with each other and inform their respective stakeholders of making the payment, and once the payment is received, the bank informs the supplier, because keep in mind the payment is made in a currency which is not the supplier's country's currency. It is neither the buyer's country's currency if he is not an American, or if the buyer is not in America. Any other country, if it is a US dollar denomination, then both buyer and supplier needs to understand the exchange rates, and the banks need to also keep suggesting or guiding the respective stakeholders about the payment procedures. A commercial invoice is a bill for the goods from the seller to the buyer. Just like when you buy something in a shop, the shopkeeper or shop owner gives you a bill and you look at the total amount and make the payment. Before looking at it, you will see whether all the items you bought are listed, and the quantity that you purchased is also listed, and the price for that particular quantity is also listed, and if there are any discounts, that is also given in the receipt, and then you make the payment. In the same way, a commercial invoice is slightly different than a pro forma invoice, is because when the supplier prepares the commercial invoice, he knows the exact quantity. Please keep in mind, in export trade, there are several goods that can be shipped exact quantity, but there are many goods where exact quantity is very difficult to pack because there are a lot of machine constraints to it. So normally the buyer and the supplier would have agreed upon in their pro forma invoice that they will accept a tolerance level for the quantity and the total amount. Definitely the amount will also change, the invoice amount. So that it depends on whether it's a 5% tolerance or a 10% tolerance. And now the supplier knows the exact quantity at the level of quality required by the buyer, how much he can pack, and that much is mentioned. After packing, he will know the packing quantities, maybe depending on the type of packing, whether it is done in a barrel or it's done in a gunny sack or it's done in a cardboard carton or a wooden box. Depending on the type of the product, there are various types of packaging. There is glass packaging, there is cardboard packaging, there is wood packaging, there is plastic packaging. There are so many packaging avenues available. And the exact quantity is mentioned. Now comes the price agreed upon and the exact amount is also mentioned. In addition to this, the commercial invoice bears some more details. The bank details are also provided because all the payment is routed through the bank and the buyer and the supplier have to keep a track about which banks through which they have to route it through. So every bank has a code and some details are given about the bank. This is followed by, at the time of commercial invoice, the goods are packed and it may be loaded in the vehicle or the transportation mode, whichever the buyer and the supplier agreed upon, and the details of the weight or the mode of transport or what we call in international trade mode of shipment is also given in that. The likelihood of when the goods will reach the destination, that is the customer's port, what we call, whether it's an airport or a seaport, is also given. In addition, very important part in a commercial invoice is there is a mention of a harmonized system code also, because every product bears a code and this code is essential so that the customs of the buyer's country really identify the goods that has been imported and what can be the kind of duty that can be levied for that import. Because the customs are aware about the government norms and regulations of the buyer in the buyer's country and they know it accordingly. There are certain dutiable goods even for exports. All goods that are exported don't have a duty to be paid by the exporter to the government. But there are certain goods, when exported, the government has to levy the tariff. So that code is very essential. With this, let's see what is in front of you. A commercial invoice is a bill. It's also a legal document often used by governments to determine the true value of the goods when assessing custom duties. As I've already informed to you, the importance of mentioning the code and the technical details shipped to the customer. It provides details of the consignment. I already informed to you, quantity, the amount to be paid, the shipment details, as I told you, the product code, and the ETD and ETA. ETD stands for expected time of departure. Well, in certain modes of transport, the goods, when it is loaded in the transport vehicle doesn't leave at the same time. It is not like a truck. Okay. Well, if it's a sea shipment, then we can load the goods today and that the confirmation from the shipping company that the goods are loaded, and that is just sufficient. ETD may be a couple of days later. That is expected time of departure. That is why we use the word expected. Followed by ETA is expected time of arrival. Both are very essential for the buyer in a foreign country or overseas to determine when the goods will reach the destination, and he can then calculate how many days are required for the goods to be cleared from his port and reach his factory or his warehouse for continuing the production process. So with this we have covered pro forma invoice and commercial invoice. Now we'll cover what is known as a packing list, which is a very essential document. It is a document required by the bank. It confirms that the company, as attached in the commercial invoice, has packed the goods, and it's a proof that the goods are inside the vehicle. In addition, there are additional documents which gives this proof. We will discuss that shortly. But a packing list is required by the banks, it is required by the customs, and very important, it is required by the buyer. Because the packing list actually consists of details of how the goods, in what variety, in how much quantity, in each of the package units is being packed. Normally, trade in international markets are in big volumes. So, if a buyer in Brazil or in Dubai or UAE, what we call, purchases the goods, then the goods, when it reaches his port, he opens the package. He may require certain variety of the products very quickly to be taken to the production floor. So at that time, the package detail or the packing list is where he refers to and understands which is in the front end packed and loaded and which is at the back end of the what we call as a container. So that's why the buyer specifically mentions that you need to pack and load the goods accordingly, so that as soon as it reaches my destination, I can pick the carton or the package unit very quickly and take it to my production floor. So it is a very detailed, informative packing of the goods. It is based on the method of packing. Various details are entered in the list to facilitate the identification of the goods by the buyer after he receives, and the seller if the buyer faces problem with the goods after receipt. In the sense, once a voluminous good, like say we are buying textile fabric, on an average, if you have to ship a polyester material, which is normally comes in the width of 44 inches or 58 inches, then you may be shipping somewhere around 70,000 meters in a shipment. In a 70,000 meter shipment, if there is a damage in between, how does the customer inform the buyer? So there are proper product details on the product and the packaging unit, which can be a wooden carton or a cardboard carton, mentioned, so that normally the buyer would mention that code and the buyer will be quickly able to identify when it was produced, which machine it was produced, and why the damage could have happened. Also, he can be able to ascertain in some cases, not in all cases. So that is why packing list has to be very clear, and it's a very important component of the trade document. The packing list normally consists of the seller details and the buyer's detail, just like your commercial invoice. The invoice number in the sense is the commercial invoice number. The date of shipment, the mode of transport, whether it's air, whether it is sea, ocean, sea liners, or it is a truck, or it's a train. Well, landlocked countries use train. When I say landlocked countries, the country is surrounded by other countries. Okay, so that is such a country, we call it as a landlocked country. Quantity, description of the goods, type of package, whether it's a box, crate, drum or a carton. The net weight and the gross weight is very important. Well, what's the net weight? A net weight is the product weight. Many a times some products require a lot of packaging in order to protect the quality of that goods, and this packaging also adds to weight. Then there is strapping required to it and coverage through gunny sacks or thermocols required to it. This will add to additional weight. So that comes to the gross weight of the product. Now, in the end, the shipping company which takes the goods and puts that in another packaging, what we call as a container, that itself has a weight. And this is very essential because they calculate the total weight altogether. So a total net and gross weight is very essential. However, customer pays for the total weight of the product. Please understand, he doesn't pay for or a supplier cannot charge for the carton and say that please pay me separately for the carton. These are all built in the pricing beforehand. Package marks and dimensions, which is mentioned on the carton, is also mentioned in the packing list. The next document that we discuss is the certificate of origin. A certificate of origin is a document that has to be sent by the supplier of the goods, where he declares that the goods are manufactured in his country. Now that comes a very important issue here. What do you mean by goods are manufactured in his country? Because to manufacture any goods, the supplier might have imported certain raw material from some other country. Now it is important to know what is the percentage of the raw material in the goods that he has manufactured, that is the finished goods. So there are various regulations that determine when a good is actually manufactured in that particular country which is shipping the goods. So this certificate of origin is a document of proof that is certified by a government or a chamber of commerce. This document is essential because the customs in the buyer's country need an evidence that the goods that is imported by the importer belongs to a country where certain duties are applicable. The document is a proof of the country of the manufacture where the goods are made. So that is about the packing list and the certificate of origin. Now, the next part we see is the bill of lading. One of the most crucial and important document is the bill of lading. As soon as the goods are packed, the goods leave the factory of the supplier, goes to the port. It can be an airport or a seaport. It is here, after customs clearance in the port, the goods are taken to the vehicle, that is the ship. We'll discuss shortly about different kinds of that, and loaded. Once the goods are accepted by the shipping company, they give a document, and that's the very important document that is known as bill of lading. This bill of lading is important for the buyer's customs, for the banks where the supplier submits the documents, because that is the proof along with the commercial invoice and the packing list that the banks in the supplier's country accept the fact that the supplier has shipped the goods. So, a bill of lading is a document that establishes the terms of a contract between a shipper and a transportation company. That's very important here. Here, no, we don't bring buyer, we bring transportation company. So, there are two common types of bill of lading. One is a straight bill of lading, other is an order bill of lading. What is a straight bill of lading? Straight bill of lading is non-negotiable. These are the terms that is used in trade finance. It is not transferable. Please keep in mind, a bill of lading has a power of awarding a title of the goods to somebody, whoever owns it. If it is non-negotiable, only the buyer's name that is written on the bill of lading, regardless of who holds that bill of lading, will have the ownership of the goods. So it mentions a specific party, normally the importer or maybe an agent to whom the goods will be delivered by the carrier. The order bill of lading is negotiable. Well, the exporter may not want to hand over the bill of lading to the buyer directly. So, the title to the goods, that is the ownership of the goods, does not go to the importer unless the bill is endorsed by the exporter or the shipping company or the importer bank. In many a times, payment has to be made for the importer's bank to endorse it and release it. Without the original bill of lading, the buyer cannot release the goods from his port. So, the importer has to present the endorsed bill of lading, and only then he will be permitted to take the possession of the goods. Also used to buy, sell or trade the goods while in transit. That means it can be given to somebody else. Well, the buyer who was originally contracted the goods is in a situation where he says that, sorry, I am in trouble, I can't make the payment. The bill of lading can also be given to another buyer who is willing to take the goods. So, these are two different types of bill of lading, and now we will discuss about what is airway bill. Just like the sea shipment, air shipments, goods sent through aircraft, cargo airlines or even commercial airlines issue an airway bill. Air freight shipments are goods shipped through international air carriers. It's a document that provides a detailed information about the shipment and allows it to be tracked. So, these are the two important trade documents, a bill of lading and the airway bill. Now, we'll look at further documents, which is a consular invoice. A consular invoice is a certificate available through the consular's representative. Let's say a supplier in India, maybe from Bombay or any other city, is shipping the goods to his customer in Europe, maybe in UK. So, a UK government has an embassy or a consulate office in India, and a document of the details of the shipment is provided by the consular of that embassy or consulate in this country, in Bombay, and that needs to be attached to. Well, it is not a compulsory document that all country might require, so in some cases it is required. Next is a combined transport document. Well, this happens when, to reach the goods to the final destination, the supplier and the buyer have to discuss and arrive how many different modes of transport the goods might have to be sent to. So, well, first leg will be the sea shipment. The goods sails from one seaport and reaches the other seaport. Then the goods will be unloaded and sent through rail to the particular railway station, and from there a series of 10 to 20 trucks will be lined up and then taken further by the road, and we normally call this as multimodal transport. So a multimodal transport is a transport where the supplier has to contract only one single company to take care of reaching the goods from one point to the other point, the final destination. So such a combined transport document is also essential if the goods are reaching the final destination. So it's a multimodal transport document is issued when the goods need to be shipped through multiple modes of transport. In addition, if a business firm is importing maybe a raw material or maybe a finished goods from one country, then once the goods reaches the port, he requires a bill of entry, and this is a form supplied by the customs office It consists of name, address of the importer, name of the vessel, the packaging details, description of the goods, address of the exporter and the port of destination. All these details are required. It's a bill of entry. Next is a dock challan. A dock challan is to be filled for the payment of the dock charges. That means when the goods are imported, dock charges needs to be paid. So these are paid when all formalities of customs are completed, and the goods imported will be delivered only after the charges are paid. So we have just concluded the mandatory documents, which is a standard documents requires in international trade. Now we'll be looking at another important element in international logistics, which is very much related to international logistics, which is known as terms of sale. The terms of sale is designated with what we call as Incoterms, or in other words, it's an acronym for International Commercial Terms. It was developed by International Chamber of Commerce. It is registered trademark, Incoterms, and it is accepted internationally between buyers and suppliers and the customs across the world, all the different terms. In international logistics, we need to understand these terms and what is the meaning of all the different abbreviations. So, Incoterms are a set of rules, and this rules specifies the obligation of the seller and the buyer. Please understand, the word is obligation. It is not who owns the goods when. It doesn't talk about transfer of title. It is only the obligation, number one. Number two, having conducted or completed that activity which was obligated, who bears the cost for that? So that is very essential to understand. Now, a set of details has been provided in front of you. For example, the first one says, between the buyer and the supplier, who is obligated to contract for the carriage of the goods? Who will enter a contract with the vehicle for transportation? Which party is responsible for obtaining the authorization required for export and custom formalities? Which party is responsible for authorization required for import and custom formalities for import? It also talks about which party is responsible for packing the goods, for transport, and who bears the cost of any pre-shipment inspections. Now, which party is obligated to provide cargo insurance, and which party bears the cost of handling these tasks? So, in the Incoterms, which are nothing more than 3 alphabets, a list of it which we'll show you shortly, there are a lot of meaning hidden inside that. However, we have tried to group it into certain commonality and then explore what each one of it really means. Before we go to these acronyms, let us understand that Incoterms does not include, there is a lot of confusion. Many people, many businesses believe that these terms of sale, the very name suggests is terms of sale. So that's where the confusion is added. Includes many other related agreements between the buyer and the supplier in an export trade or the import. Well, Incoterms does not address all the conditions of the sale. There are several other conditions, like packing, like reaching the goods at a particular date or before the particular date, Incoterms doesn't address these issues. It does not identify what sort of goods are sold, what are the price for that particular goods, whether it is in meters, yards, kilos, pieces. No, it doesn't address that. It doesn't refer to the mode of payment or when the payment has to be made for the goods that is sold to the buyer. Very important, it does not address when the ownership of the goods passes from seller to the buyer. It only refers to the obligation and who is responsible. Like, if the goods are loaded in the ship, certain terms of sale says that once the goods are loaded and if the goods get damaged after getting loaded, if let's say there's a fire outbreak in the ship, the goods get damaged, then who is obligated? Well, if the goods were kept in the port in front of the ship and the goods got fire due to some mishap, goods got damaged, then who is obligated for the payment? But here it doesn't say that who is the owner of the goods, in the sense when the ownership was transferred from the supplier to the buyer. That is not being addressed here. It does not specify the documents, all the documents that we listed and some more if it is required by the buyer, that is to be provided by the seller to the buyer and facilitate the process of customs clearance at the buyer's country. It does not also specify liability for the failure to provide the goods in conformity with the contract of sales. What happens if the customer required 45 inches of width of a textile fabric width and the customer received 58 inches? That is, there is a failure in providing the goods as confirmed between the suppliers and the buyers, and that is where the problem emerges. But the terms of sale does not specify that. It does not talk about delayed delivery. It does not talk about dispute resolution mechanisms. It is just terms of sales. So, let us see what are those. We are divided into two parts. One is Incoterms, that is only for sea and inland waterway transport. It is only for that. That means those things are not used for any other modes of transport. Those are free alongside ship, FAS. FOB is free on board. CFR is cost and freight. Some companies mention CNF. N here is cost and freight. CFR and CNF are same. CIF is including an insurance. That is cost, insurance and freight. That is one part of it. Now the second part of Incoterms can be used in any mode of transport including sea shipments. That is Ex-Works, FCA, that is free carriage, CPT is carriage paid to, CIP is carriage and insurance paid to, DPU stands for delivered at place unloaded. Next is DAP, delivered at place, and finally DDP, that is delivered with duty paid. So we have some in E starting group, that is Ex-Works. Then we have some groups which starts with C. Then some group starts with F and some group starts with D. So with E starts Ex-Works. If you group the Incoterms with the alphabet beginning with C, then we have CPT, CIP, CFR and CIF. Then we have other terms starting with D, that is in front of you, DPU, DAP, DDP, and then F, which is FCA, FOB and FAs. So you can look at it in this grouping also. So now we have grouped it in the next slide based on a very important obligation. Let us see what is it. The Ex Works, FCA, free carriage, FAS, free alongside ship, and free on board. All these terms, whenever it is mentioned, the meaning is the buyer pays for the shipping cost. That is the importer. When we look at CNF, cost and freight, CIF, CPT, and CIP, in all these different terms, the seller pays the shipping cost. But the goods travel at the buyer's risk. Any problem with the goods? Then the buyer has to be responsible for it. DAT, DAP and DDP. Here, the sellers pay the shipping cost and also all the travel risk. Now, depending on the kind of goods that is being sent, the quantity, the criticality, the fragility of the goods, perishability of the goods, the cost, the unit cost, buyer and supplier arrive upon the term of sales. That is why before passing on the price to the buyer, a supplier has to know what is the obligation that he needs to adhere to. Normally, the supplier always incorporates those in his price. But however, sometimes if the market price cannot be rising any further, then the supplier has to bear those costs and deduct it from his profit margins. Can also be the case. So, let us look at a very common terms of sale which is used, which is FOB, FAS, CFR and CIF. So, in a sea shipment, we have taken only these 4 different terms of sales because ocean, sea shipments are one of the largest mode of transport used in the world for export trade. Air is negligible, road and followed by rail and then pipe comes to those order. So that's why what is commonly used for sea or inland waterway transport, we have described only that. FOB is free on board. Here the seller delivers the goods on board a vessel nominated by the buyer. Once the goods are on board the vessel, the buyer is made responsible. That's where the obligation of the seller ends. Free alongside ship at a named port of export is very important. Means that exporter quotes a price for the goods, includes charges for delivery of the goods alongside a vessel at the port. That means the goods are taken from the seller to the port and the goods are placed in front of the vessel, and that's where the obligation of the seller ends. The custom procedures required for clearance, export clearance is all borne by the seller. All the other cost that comes after placing the goods in front of the sea is borne by the buyer. Cost and freight is a very commonly used term, CNF, where the seller is responsible for the freight contract. He has to now discuss with the shipping company or the shipping agent, and the goods has to be taken to the port. It has to be safely loaded and responsibility passes to the buyer after it is loaded. That means the obligation. Please understand, once again, denote ownership. The CIF is cost, insurance and freight. This is what most of the buyers would prefer because it consists of everything that CFR addresses, but also an insurance coverage. So, with CFR, the seller pays for the freight contract, but also for the insurance coverage. So, having completed the terms of sales and the documents and the procedures required in export trade, we will now slowly narrow it down to the logistics part here. That is, the most important player here is the customs. Every government and a specific ministry have air customs, sea customs, land customs. So, we'll just give you a brief about what is the role of customs. The Custom Department are designated authority. It's an act of parliament by the government to implement policies related to import and export. They are the key people who collect data of trade, and in India specifically they submit it to Directorate General of Commercial Intelligence and Statistics. This comes directly under Ministry of Commerce. That's where we get most of the import and export data. In fact, in the previous session, I have shown you the total export and import with America and UAE and Saudi Arabia, Iraq, etc. So, this data comes from Ministry of Commerce. And who gets those data? The Directorate of Commercial Intelligence and Statistics, which is again provided by the customs personnel. So, they are mandated to collect customs duty. Customs duty is a very important form of revenue for the government, and they are the sole authority to collect duties. However, the levies are decided by the Ministry of the Commerce. The government, the Ministry of Finance decides what kind of category of goods has to come under what duty. They also facilitate the movement of goods and cargo into and out of the country. Customs help in regulating trade in accordance with the objectives and the policies, so that there is no harmful substances entering the country, damage the social fabric or the health, the hygiene of the country, spread maybe unwanted, uncalled for viruses or bacteria. It is properly taken care. The goods that reaches the country, please understand, imports are one of the major source of also spreading pandemic in a country. Okay, so customs play a pivotal role in checking smuggling, maybe gold smuggling or other unwanted harmful substances, and other transaction which does not take place in accordance with the provisions of the law. Well, there are a lot of issues related to money laundering and other unwanted substances entering the country and damaging the nation from within. So, this is a very, very crucial objective of the Customs Department. Now, like in other businesses, middlemen play a major role to facilitate the trade also. These are, one of the middlemen are known as freight forward, and the other middleman is a custom clearance agent. We'll study the roles of both the freight forwarder and the custom clearance agents and how they facilitate trade between buyers and suppliers, that is exporters and importers. A freight forwarder is an entity, it's a company. When I say it's a company, he must be a registered company. Well, the number of people working in this company may be very limited, very small. Not all freight forwarders are very large establishments, but some have a global presence also, and they have a vast network of offices around the world. It's an entity that undertakes to transfer the cargo of the customer from one point to the other. That is the key role of a freight forwarder. So, as the name suggests, he forwards the goods for the customer. He has the capability to negotiate freight rates with the shipping line. Well, many times the importer or the exporter normally don't contact the shipping companies directly. Freight forwarder is a very handy person. He has the knowledge about the different pricing of the shipping companies, the liners, from one place of destination to the other place of destination. He also collects the goods and buys a single unit of the loading, which is known as a container. A container comes in various forms, various sizes, normally 20 feet, 40 feet or 40 feet high, cube what we call. Here, let's say a standard capacity container, one of the customer does not have so much goods. So there is always an empty space left. So a freight forwarder is a person who does this collecting of the goods. So normally if the space occupied by the goods of one single customer is only half the size of the container, we call it less than a container load, and the other half needs to be filled by other companies who want to reach the goods to the same destination but for a different buyer. So he has to collect those goods and fit it in a complete container, which is known as a full container load. We call it FCL. So there is an LCL and an FCL. He has the capability then to negotiate the freight rates with the shipping line. He can bring it at a very economical and competitive price. He is experienced in all modes of transport. Normally freight forwarders should be, and they are, or they at least have a network of agents who work along with each other for road, rail, air, sea, etc. He is able to provide a very cost-effective and shipping solution to the customers. He is able to arrange the storage for the cargo. So this is very essential. As soon as the goods arrive at the port of destination, the goods require certain time for clearance. So normally the customs of any port will give certain time for the goods to be stored in certain area of a warehouse, for which they don't levy any charges. But after that period is over, there's charges per day that has to be borne by the buyer. The freight forwarders, usually big freight forwarders, have their own warehouses. So they are able to arrange storage for the cargo. They are able to arrange the distribution or forwarding of the cargo as per the instruction of the client. And they book the cargo with the shipping line as per the requirement of the client, because here also terms of sales are very important. So they process all the shipping documents. There are several shipping documents required, because the goods, once it reaches the port, it has to go through certain stages. At each stage certain charges are levied. There's terminal handling charges, there's port charges, etc. And certain documentation is required. All the relevant documentation the freight forwarder is very well equipped with. He has the know-how of it. He has to give certain exams for that to be able to call himself a freight forwarder, and he can be able to process all the documents. He arranges for transportation of the cargo from customer premises to the port. That is also very important. This is all essential because if a company factory is located very close to the port, so normally if companies are located in what we call as export processing zones, these are located very close to the port. So the transportation is very distance is very negligible. So the truck leaves the factory premises and reaches the port maybe in a couple of minutes. Take few turns, that's it. But if the factory is located at a very far distance, then taking the goods right from the factory to the port requires, and the transportation time may require almost 12 to 24 hours sometimes. So that is, arranging that transportation facility is also done by freight forwarder. That means they take the order from the supplier right from that point of time. Or the customer basically contracts with the freight forwarder and says it is X factory. X factory is the goods are produced by the factory and it is kept in the factory. The customer, the importer, will appoint a freight forwarder. This freight forwarder will come to the factory and pick up the goods from the factory premises. And then the journey begins. He may or may not be accredited to customs or port, etc. Now, the freight forwarder normally, after the goods are placed on board, the following documents he has to look into. I have listed down certain documents which are essential to be known by the freight forwarder. First is a clean on-board bill of lading. So, we have discussed what is bill of lading. We discussed types of bill of lading. The bill of lading is handed over to the freight forwarder. It's a copy of an invoice attested by the customs. That means the customs have given the seal of approval for the goods. Copies of the shipping bill, export order, that is the sales order in original, the letter of credit in original, if any. Well, we have not discussed about the terms of payment. However, one of the terms of payment is a letter of credit. That means once the buyer confirms the order with the supplier and the supplier demand is the payment should be made through letter of credit, then the buyer would have issued a letter of credit from the bank, his bank in his country, and the bank that issues that letter of credit, that is known as issuing bank, will send the original letter of credit through courier and send a message that such an LC is opened through an international financial code known as SWIFT to the bank of the supplier, the designated bank. The bank of the supplier will then inform the supplier that they have received a message from another country's bank with following details of buyer of goods in your company's name for your account. So, that's where later on they send the original letter of credit also to the bank and the bank hands it over to the supplier. So this original letter of credit is also should be attached in the customs. There's a duplicate copy of the excise duty payment which is paid and duplicate copy of what we call a GR form. These are all related in India. AR form and GR form are necessary documents. One is excise duty, other is value of the goods. Both are submitted. Next comes is what we call as a clearing agent. So, one intermediary is a freight forwarder, other intermediary is a clearing agent. If you combine them together, we call them CNF agent. So, we'll discuss first what is clearing agent and then see what is CNF means. A clearing agent is known as also customs broker, customs house agents. Well, they are very distinct unit. They are very important entities. Why? Because both exporters and importers services of custom house agents. So, custom house agents are required at both the end. One is custom clearance at the exports. That means an exporter that is selling the goods, and custom clearance is always required also at the destination, that is at the import location. So, clearing agents play a very crucial role in import and clearance of cargo. They complete all the custom procedure on behalf of the consignee, that is the importer. That's another word used for at the shipping domain, a consignor and a consignee. He keeps in-depth knowledge of the harmonized system code, a calculation of the duty applicable. And they are basically required to operate with a license, and this license is only when he clears the examination known as CBLR, Custom Board of License Regulations. They need to be certified with this in order to become a custom clearing agent. That means they need to have a very thorough knowledge about the custom procedures, documentation, duties, and other port related charges. They are registered with a local port or a company with a customs authorities. They facilitate timely and prompt customs inspection. That is very essential, because once the goods reach, the importer might require the goods quickly. So there are tons and tons of goods from various different destinations at various different suppliers in the world lying at the port. He promptly he negotiates with the customs to get the goods inspected, and only after inspection further activities can take place. Otherwise, the goods will not be released to the buyer. So they work towards fast transfer of cleared goods to the storage facility of the customer. The agent may be appointed by the exporter, importer, or a freight forwarder. Please understand, the distinct role of custom clearance agent is not as that of freight forwarder. Now, the clearing agent does not negotiate freight rates. Who does the negotiation of freight rates? It is freight forwarder. He doesn't issue the bill of lading in his capacity as a clearing agent. So these are very important things what he does not do. Now, a freight forwarder and a clearing agent are together known as CNF agent. We call them clearing and forwarding agent. So, the clearance process, which is essential in case any students want to pursue their career as customs clearance, then definitely they need to go through a very tedious exam, which I just informed. So on arrival of the consignment, custom clearance agent has to clear the consignment within the free period. Free means what? Free means as soon as the goods reach, the customs allows the goods to be in that warehouse for a particular period of time. So sometimes it is 3 days or 4 days, like that. After that period, they levy some charges. These charges in international trade is known as demurrage. So demurrage is always levied per day. So it is always in the interest of the buyer that the custom clearance agent has to clear the goods very quickly and not keep it lying in the designated customs area. The customs carry out physical inspection and valuation. If the custom deemed, they will ask to open the container seal and inspect the goods. Then they will decide upon the value of the duty that has to be paid. So valuation of the import is based on description of the items. Where the description of the items, they are in commercial invoice. Classification of the item under relevant customs tariff guideline. So every product is listed in a category and a particular code, and that duty has to be levied. Customs finally decides that. There are certain no case of under invoicing, which is a very rampant practice during certain times, which customs has effectively tried to reduce. Okay, so in order to avoid duty, wherever the duty is levied based on the volume, that is the amount total. Volume multiplied by the unit price is the amount. So if you reduce the volume or the price, then you need to pay less duty. So some companies do play mischief. So the customs here ascertain during the process of valuation. Then they finally arrive at the custom duty that is required to be paid. The clearance agency informs this details to the importer and executes the necessary duty payments. After the payment, the physical delivery of the consignment is received and the custom clearing agent delivers it to the importer at the designated place along with the set of original documents. That is very important. Importer cannot discard those documents. He has to file that in case of future requirements. So we reach to the final part. That is the role of intermediaries in international trade. The clearing agents look into certain documents. Some documents involved in custom clearance for export. Custom clearance. The purchase order from the buyer. The invoice, that is your commercial invoice. The packing list. Bill of lading or the airway bill. Certificate of origin. And any specific documentation as required by the buyer. Certain approvals, certain stamping. Or required by the financial institution, that is the banks, as per the importing country regulation. So, most of these documents we have already covered. Now, look at the import documentation. These documents involved in custom clearance for imports are purchase order from the buyer, the sales invoice of supplier, bill of entry, we have discussed this already, bill of lading, obviously, packing list, certificate of origin, and any other specific document required by the buyer or financial institutions of the country. So, these are the important documents that has to be looked into by the clearing agent. So, with this, we finish the documentation and procedures in international trade. The most important part here is the term of sale, which needs to be looked into by the students. And now we will proceed with the further part of the unit. Thank you.